Mount of Olives. We're not really going to need much light tonight. Jack, would you mind turning off the light? I'm just going to take this back here. Then turn both of them off. I think everybody can see okay. What we have here, remember that maps in the Middle East have an eastern orientation. So north is actually the left side of this map, and the east is what's up on top. And as Jesus would have traveled to Jerusalem, he would have traveled from the northern region of Galilee. He would have traveled down the west side of the Jordan River. Most of the time, we know from John 4 that he actually went through the middle of the country and went through Samaria. But most of the time, most of the pilgrims, Jesus at times, would travel through the west bank of the Jordan River. They would come down to Jericho, which was where the southern end of the Jordan River would hit the north side of the Dead Sea, and he would turn west from Jericho and would head towards Jerusalem. And when he would get to Jerusalem, he would hit Bethany, and then he would start the ascent. You can see the Mount of Olives, the wording there, and the peak of it just under the word Bethphage. He would get to Bethany. He would travel with his entourage, with his disciples, probably to Bethphage, would probably go through Bethphage, and then would go down towards, you can see the red line where for the first time it goes straight south. There's a 90-degree bend to the south. And that black square there is the Garden of Gethsemane and the Mount of Olives. And then he would have crossed the Kidron Valley, which is represented where he would cross it, is that's scribbly line there. Probably not inaccurate. He probably was not having to make his way down into the valley and back up. There was probably a bridge there at that time, and then he would make it into the Temple Mount there at the Golden Gate. And Bethany, as you know, is the place that was really, really famous for three people. Do you remember who those three people are? Lazarus, Martha, and Mary, his two sisters. And you'll remember in John 11, Jesus hears that Lazarus is sick unto death. He tarries, does not make his way to Bethany right there at that moment, and gets word that Lazarus has died, and that's when he goes to Bethany. And if you go to Bethany today, you can see the tomb of St. Lazarus. This place, we talk about ones and twos and threes. 1, X marks the spot. 2 is you're closer than you've ever been before. 3 is probably not even remotely the place. This is, to me, this is a 3. This strikes me more than anything else as a way to make money by getting people to go into an old building. And of course, I always leave room and humility. I could be wrong, but this is a place that I would be able to walk into easily. Phil Brown would have some difficulty. Phil would nearly have to bend over to a 90-degree to go into this place, and then to kind of travel down some stairs into the place that commemorates where Lazarus was buried in the tomb when Jesus came, and he came back to life with the grave clothes on, and you know the story. The Golden Gate. The Golden Gate is a really, really important gate in Jerusalem. It is the gate into the east side of the Temple Mount from the Mount of Olives. And the reason the Golden Gate was really important, the rabbis taught that the Messiah was coming. And, in different rabbinical writings and in different religious writings out of Judaism in that time, there was a lot of thought that the Messiah would come actually at the time that Jesus did come. And what the rabbis taught is that if the Messiah came from the sky, he was coming in judgment. If he came on ground and entered through the Golden Gate, he was coming in peace and in forgiveness and in salvation. What is a little bit ironic about this gate and all of that is the gate, the Muslim folk have filled it in. And as you know, there are Jewish folk that are still waiting for the Messiah to come. There's, anytime there is a red heifer that is born in Israel, There, it makes the newspapers, as you'll remember, that it's the ashes of a red heifer that are used to consecrate things. And a red heifer, when it's born in Israel, carries a lot of news, because there are people that are waiting for the Messiah to come, and the reestablishing of Judaism and Jewish folk as the Old Testament Jewish folk. And there's, I think it's a pharmacy that is not far from the Temple Mount, that actually has, in the upper rooms of that pharmacy, has some of the emblems that would go into the temple once it was reconsecrated with the ashes of a red heifer. So you have the Muslim folk who do not want to see that happen, so they have filled in the gates. And then, can you tell what that is in front of the gates? Maybe in this picture here you can see it a little bit better. The Golden Gate, you see that evergreen tree, the tall, thin one, just to the right of the tip of it is the Golden Gates. I think somebody said it. What is that that's in front of that? Cemetery. And so you've got Muslim folk who have built their Dome of the Rock on the place where the temple, they think the temple probably was. They have filled in the doors, the gates, to the Golden Gate, and they put a cemetery in front of the Golden Gate. Why would they put a cemetery in front of the Golden Gate? Messiah is supposed to enter through the Golden Gate and go into the temple area, the temple precinct, to declare himself. But if he goes through a cemetery, what happens? He's unclean and will never be able to go into the temple precincts to declare himself as the Messiah, because he will be unclean. So you got a lot of psyops taking place in the Middle East, and the Muslim folk are not having any kind of a political or religious conversation with them. The Palestinians are really nice people, but the Palestinians and folk of the Muslim faith, they don't want Israel just not to get the Temple Mount or even to be recognized as a nation. They want Israel to just disappear. And this goes back to the time when Ariel Sharon was president, the prime minister of Israel. Yasser Arafat, was the head of the PLO, and Arafat, the Palestinian Liberation Organization made all kinds of demands. We want this and this and this and this and this. And Sharon rightly understood that they want to erase any vestige of Israel's history from the land of Israel and from Jerusalem. And so Sharon, knowing this, said publicly, we will give Yasser Arafat anything he wants, plus we're going to sweeten the deal with this and this and this and this and this. And Arafat said, no, that is, no, I don't agree. And Sharon was able to say, well, I told you, they don't want us here anyway. And that's why peace is going to be such a hard thing to come by in the Middle East. Here is looking at the inside of the Golden Gate from the Temple Mount side of it. And as you can see, not only are the outside gates, but the inside gates are filled in as well. You can get a better picture of it right here. And you can see that wall there to the middle right. Those are not the stones that were there during the time of Jesus. Those are Crusader stones. The walls were torn down and built up and torn down and built up, and those were not the stones that were there during the time of Jesus. This road, though, was there during the time of Jesus. This road is at least 2,000 years old. This, although it obviously did not look like this, but this is the road that led over the top of the Mount of Olives and would have gone down to the Kidron Valley, and the people would have crossed and been able to to go into the temple, go into Jerusalem. And that road that has been there for thousands of years was, as you know, eventually people were still using it, and this road was finally paved over. And but this is the road that Jesus would have come down this way on his way to Jerusalem. And you can see, as you're coming down the Mount of Olives, in the circle there is the Golden Gate, and that low area. You know, we're declining into it, and you can see on the other side there, on the across from the Mount of Olives, as it's going up, you can see the Golden Gate there, and it gives you an idea of where this road is. And does anybody recognize the guy on the left? Yes, my son Jordan. And the guy on the right was our tour guy, a guy by the name of Yuval, who said, and this is a part of the road that's actually pretty safe to walk on. There are parts of it, if you look back at this picture, there's really no sidewalk there until you get down, you know, halfway down the road there. And he said, you know, people drive fast on this road. It's a very dangerous road, so make sure that you stay against the wall. And my only son is walking down the middle of that thing like he owns the place. And I'm not sure, that may have been about the time I was saying, Jordan, get out of the road. This is a church that is found on the side of the Mount of Olives. It's Dominus Flevit, which means the Lord, you know, Dominus, the Lord wept, Flevit. It's based on Luke chapter 19. When Jesus drew near this and saw the city, he wept over it. And this is a 5th century church built on a Byzantine site. Again, the name of the church, Sanctuary of the Lord Wept. And this is the top of the building. You see those vases. There are actually 4 vases at the top of this church building. Anybody know what those vases might be? In light of this being the church over the site, traditionally thought to be where Jesus wept over the city, emphasis on wept.
Catch rain?
Catch, not rain, but tears. Yes, those are tear catchers, and there have been just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tear catchers that have been found in and around this site. This will give that picture down there at the bottom right. I don't have a clue as to where that is. I forgot to insert a picture there. I mean, that may be Italy. I mean, I don't know. But the map there for the Garden of Gethsemane shows where, you know, most folk think that the city of Bethphage was located. Bethphage means the city of the unripened figs. And the importance of Bethphage is, as Jesus is going for the last time to Jerusalem, Matthew chapter 21, Mark 11, I think probably around Luke 19 or so, Bethphage is the place where he sends the 2 disciples on his way to Jerusalem and says, you know, there'll be a guy there with a colt, you know, and that is the city where that colt came from, that Jesus on Palm Sunday, the beginning of that last week of his life, last week of his ministry before the cross, it is from Bethphage that he rides that colt into the temple area. You can see down there at the very bottom the pool of Siloam. That is the pool in John 9 where the blind man was given back his sight. You see a bit of a dotted line that goes from that pool up into the area where the temple is located. That dark line on the right and the light line on the left that go down to the pool of Siloam actually kind of outline the area that would have been known as the Ophel and the city of David, and would have been part of the lower city. There's, you know, the Gihon Spring, and, you know, there are all kinds of water tunnels and things like that that are in that area. If you look to the left of that lightly dotted line, you see the palace of the high priest, you see the palace of Herod the Great. That was known as the upper city, and you know, it would have been the top of you know, the high point with the Tyropian valley between that and the temple. And the palace of the high priest, you know, it is the house of Caiaphas, which would have been the palace of the high priest, that where you see that little green square, that would have been the place where Jesus would have been taken after he was arrested at the Garden of Gethsemane and the Mount of Olives. They would have traveled across the Kidron Valley. They would have crossed the Tyropoeon Valley, gone up into the upper city to that palace of the high priest. You'll see there on the far side of that little area the palace of Herod the Great. During the time of Jesus's cross and his passion, his crucifixion, resurrection, that actually would have been the place where Pontius Pilate would have lived. And you see to the north of the word temple, where the Temple Mount is, that little green square is the fortress Antonia, which would have been the fortress that the Romans would have occupied. And interesting, you know, the Romans, as we've said before, they didn't care really what gods you worshipped as long as you kept the Roman peace. And there were 3 times a year that Moses, you know, in Deuteronomy says, you know, everybody's supposed to go to Jerusalem, you know, Passover and Sukkot, you know, the Temple of Booths and things like that. And that was where the people during the time of Jesus would have really gotten anxious for the Messiah to come. And the fortress Antonia was built next to the Temple Mount because the Temple Mount itself looks like a fortress. It looks like a gigantic fortress, and when people got inside of it and started getting rambunctious, that in Rome's mind was when bad things would begin to happen. So the fortress Antonia was built on the northwest corner of the temple, high enough where they could look into the temple precincts and see what was going on. And that's not a gigantic piece of real estate. I mean, it's all very walkable and not very long at all. The picture in the upper right-hand corner, you see a building. It's actually a church. It looks like an egg crate or egg carton on top of it. That is a church we'll talk about here in just a second. You'll see it going down from that building. You'll see kind of a squared off area. That is an area that is called the Garden of Gethsemane. Garden of Gethsemane during the time of Jesus was probably much bigger than that. Also, it was never called the Garden of Gethsemane. It was a grove of trees. Pilgrims referred to, it was referred to as Gethsemane, and it was when the pilgrims, after the time of Jesus, went there and would leave, they wouldn't talk about the Garden of Gethsemane. They would talk about the Cave of Gethsemane, which we will talk about here in just a minute. In the Garden of Gethsemane today, you will find really, really old olive trees. Olive trees are, to me, are absolutely gorgeous trees. That's why I like, our oaks down here, our live oaks here in South Texas. I just like, the gnarled look and different shapes, and you just think when you look at this that God doesn't like a straight line, and that's why there are no straight lines in nature. But Josephus says, and this tree, there was I forget the college, I think it was a West Coast college, around 1982-83 would have gone and would have done some carbon dating and would find that the root of this particular tree, which is the oldest in the garden, in the grove of trees, would go back about 2,300 years. So you would think, okay, this tree, this olive tree, as old as it is and still alive, was there during the time of Jesus, which would be wrong because in Josephus' Antiquity, or the Wars of the Jews, he reports that all the trees surrounding Jerusalem, and I think it was like a 7-mile radius around Jerusalem, were cut down by the Romans as they were putting together their siege equipment, and they were putting together firewood to burn down the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. So this tree right here was not there during the time of Jesus, but it's very likely, if the carbon dating is accurate, that the roots of this tree were there during the time of Jesus. Here's another picture of it. One of the things I like about this picture is you see old school, new school. You've got, and I think that may be Wayne Rushing's hand with a camera taking a picture of that tree. But then you'll notice as you go down the fence line, everybody else is taking pictures with their iPhones. And in fact, I took this picture with my iPhone as well. Wayne, do you wear a black watch like that?
I don't remember. I did at one time.
Yeah,
It doesn't look like my camera, but
you didn't. You don't have
it's
a.
pretty close to wherever that is. I can
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah.
I took a picture, in the same picture it looks like.
So yeah, beautiful, beautiful olive trees though, and when on this particular trip in 2016, we spent probably, I don't know, half an hour or so in this garden area, just kind of meditating on Luke chapter 22, and which is the largest account of what happened in the Garden of Gethsemane on the night that Jesus was betrayed. And there's all kinds of things that you run into in this garden. Again, it's not huge, but it's you can actually find some quiet time and some quiet place in this garden. And people will take the rocks and spell out the word peace and things like that on the ground. And it's quite a place for meditation. Well, you'll notice the Garden of Gethsemane. If you look in that upper left-hand corner, you'll see the dome of that church that looked like the egg crate carton that we showed in that picture about three frames previous. And there is a sign that says, "To the church." And this is known as the Church of All Nations, also known as the Basilica of Agony. This church was built by several nations. And as you go inside, starting with Argentina and going to the United States, there's a listing and kind of a recognition of all of those nations that were a part of the building of this church. This church was built around the 1920s. The churches that were built on this spot earlier were either torn down or ruined or burned or whatever. And this one was built it's kind of a United Nations effort to build a church that commemorates the place where Jesus cried out to God in prayer, "Lord, let this cup pass from me," and where he sweated the drops of blood. These are actually pictures that Wayne took of the ceiling. These are not my pictures, but his. But what he was trying to do, and it's very difficult to do, given you're on a flat surface and the lighting and all of that. Or excuse me, you're taking a picture from the ground of a non-flat surface, is to try to get an idea of the roof of this building and the domes that make up the roof of this basilica. And it's really a beautiful place. I mean, the gold and the ornateness of it is not necessarily my cup of tea. I mean, I don't want to come home to this after a day of work, but when you walk in, you just can't help but be struck by the beauty of it. Here's another picture and I think Wayne did probably about as good a job as you could with getting that column in there for you to be able to see how this church, the roof, the ceiling of it is just a series of domes. And the church commemorates the place where Jesus prayed on a rock. And this church, in the nave portion of it, which is on the opposite end of where you enter it, the church is built really on top of this rock right here, where tradition, again, church tradition says this is the place where Jesus prayed, "Lord, let this cup pass from me." And he was there by himself, and the sweat with the drops of blood in it, and so on and so forth. That surround that rock. And you'll see back behind the rock, you'll see the altar, and then you'll see this really, it's kind of a strange looking, and I'm sure it has some important use within the Catholic Church, but you'll see behind it kind of that weird looking wooden shaped object. Now you'll see the top of that wooden object at the bottom of the picture. And that's to help you to see where this particular mosaic is located. And it is a mosaic of Jesus crying out to God to let the cup pass. On either side of that rock are the olive trees from the Garden of Gethsemane, and above it is the angel that strengthened him, sent by God to strengthen him, not to stop suffering, but to strengthen him in order to keep suffering until death on the cross. And again, another picture from Wayne. This is a close-up of that picture. Very, very stunning mosaic. It's not ancient, but still the same. It's a very stunning, beautiful mosaic. But there is another theory about the place where Jesus prayed. We get this out of John chapter 18. When Jesus had finished praying, after celebrating meal with his disciples, he leaves with his disciples. They cross from Jerusalem the Kidron Valley, so that they're now on the Mount of Olives. On the other side there was an olive grove, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who had betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had met there often with his disciples. So Judas came to the grove, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it that you want?" And so the theory goes something like this, based on John 18, that you have, and this is just a square for the sake of marking a region, but you got this area known as the Garden of Gethsemane. And it says that, they crossed the Kidron Valley and they went into it. And then Jesus, goes a little bit further with a couple of the disciples, and then goes a little bit further, and that's where he prays. And what you have going on here, and what is poignant about this particular passage is that Jesus has had the meal with his disciples, Passover meal with his disciples, and there is this thing in Judaism known as Haverot, which is table fellowship. In table fellowship, and table fellowship is, you sit down and you share a meal, and you basically are sharing a meal with people that agree with you politically and religiously. Pharisees eat with Pharisees, Sadducees with Sadducees, and you eat with family. But this is one of the reasons why they were always getting on Jesus. Why are you eating with tax collectors? Why are you eating with these kinds of people? Because they saw Jesus as this righteous person, this holy person, and why is he sharing the table with people that are not like him? Which, in so doing, Jesus was kind of turning upside down what the kingdom of God was all about. And so the rabbis taught that table fellowship the fellowship would extend past the meal until somebody, basically, the fellowship was broken. And one of the ways that the fellowship was broken is if somebody fell asleep. And so they've had the meal. They go, and they sing a hymn. They cross the Kidron Valley. They're in the Garden of Gethsemane. They go into the grove of trees. He's there with his closest associates, the 11. He takes a couple with him. And so he's separating himself from the group. He's there with a couple of them. And then he goes and prays by himself. And when he comes back, what does he find them doing? They're asleep. At that point, and this is something that we don't really pull out of the text unless there's some familiarity with rabbinical teaching out of Talmud, but it's a big deal that they're asleep. And it's bigger than just, okay, I'm really upset and you guys can't even pray with me. It's also the fact that now Jesus emotionally is on his own. That fellowship has been broken. And not only is it the anxiety that he feels in seeing what it is that he is going to be suffering, and praying, God, let this cup pass. But it's also emotionally, he is now alone. And the only thing in prayer that he has is to go to whom? God. And what happens on the cross? My God, why have you? And so this is all part of a really poignant scene about what happens. And so Jesus has gone in, and they've fallen asleep, and the text says that they went in. He goes a little further. Judas comes and he goes out. If he's already in, why is he going out? And one of the theories is that he was not at this rock where the Basilica of Agony is located, but that he was actually located in a grotto or a cave known as the Gethsemane, or the wine press, or excuse me, the olive press, which is what Gethsemane is the name talks about, it's a place of the olive press. And this is that grotto. It's known as the Garden of Gethsemane Grotto. If, again, you go north from the Basilica of Agony, you have to cross a street, and then you go a little bit further. And again, you're talking about like a 2-minute walk at most. You go down, and in the lower right-hand corner, you have to go into an alley, very narrow alley, and you go in through that door, and that's what takes you to this Garden of the Gethsemane Grotto, which is a cave. And inside the cave, there is a place for the... you're probably going to have to hit the lights again there, Brent. Sorry about that. But, the olive press, there would have been a wall with a little niche in it. The niche would have held, a beam. There would have been sacks of olives, on top of a stone. Weights would have been, I don't know if they were dumbbells, but, the weights would have been put on the end, and it would have, squeezed down on the olives in the sack. The olive oil would have run down into a pool, as we saw that they would have had at Capernaum, and that was inside of this cave. The niche for that beam would have been there, and that's where they would have pressed the olives that would have come off of that tree. And as you can see, if you can get the lights again, it's a place that is considered to be the place of prayer in Luke chapter 22, and there's a church service that meets there, and people go there to be in a place that they think is the place where Jesus prayed. Let this cup pass, but not my will, but your will be done. Having the opportunity. He's already separated himself from Jerusalem by the Kidron Valley. He's already close to the top, at least midway up the mountain, and could have escaped. Could have gone across the Jordan River, could have gotten into some other nation, disappeared, and the Romans would never have found him. But because he was given to the will of God, he stays. And being righteous and loving, which meant that, most sensitive man who ever lived on the face of the planet, all the more it was painful to see what it was he was to suffer. And that's one of the things that Scripture makes very clear, is that not only did he die for our sins, but he suffered for our sins. And this is the beginning of that suffering and the sweat drops of blood. The amazing thing, though, is that Jesus did not see any battle, did not see any battle of the faith that would be won outside of prayer. Jesus, when he's facing something, goes to prayer. And the battle of the cross, the death on the cross, all of that is going to be won in the Garden of Gethsemane. And this is the place where choosing to do God's will more than he wanted to do his own will, we find ourselves the recipients not just of the grace of salvation, but the grace of being a new creation, the grace of receiving his Holy Spirit, the grace of being adopted into his family, the grace of being a part of God's kingdom. And my own personal opinion is, if I'm forced to choose, this would be the place I would choose, is probably being the closest place to what the biblical account tells us where this prayer took place. Here's another picture. It's not a little cave.
So you rank this a 1?
For me, it would be a 1. It'd be a 1.5. We're not there. And I hate to sound like a postmodern person who says, well, you can't know because you weren't there. But, I think we can be surprised at how much we do know. And this it seems to fit the text. And I've read the arguments on both sides of the coin, and I would fall in favor of this. And why I was disappointed that we didn't do this in 2016, we went into the Garden of Gethsemane and we went into the Basilica, which was the other proposed place where that prayer took place in the Garden of Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane is not debated. That's the Garden of Gethsemane. Where the prayer took place is what's debated. And I would lean here. And to kind of give you an idea of where all of this is located, again, remember everything is oriented to the east. So you'll see the Grotto of Gethsemane at about the 10 o'clock position. You'll see the arrow to the north. And so that road that runs out in front of the green Garden of Olives area is actually a road that runs basically north and south. Now, if we start on the right side, the Basilica of the Agony is the place where we saw all of the domes. And the yellow part, there were several churches in this place. The one that exists now is the number 4, and you see the black square. Up at the very top of the black square, you see the rounded area. That would be that nave area, where on that curved area is the mosaic that would have Jesus praying on the rock. And in front of that would be the actual rock itself that this church is built on, believing that that's the place where Jesus prayed the prayer. If you go now more to the left, you'll see that white alleyway between the green area and the Basilica of the Agony. Down in the corner is where we were taking that picture, where you had the camera and you had the iPhones taking the picture, and it's in the Garden of the Olives where you find those white stone pathways right next to that church. And that's, in the Basilica of the Agony and the Garden of Olives, that's where we spent the majority of the time on that day. If we were to go up the street, cross the road, and then travel towards the tomb of the Virgin, and this is the tomb of where Mary is believed to have been buried. Right before you get to the tomb of the Virgin, you take a right, and there's that narrow passageway with a white rock, and the door that leads into that grotto, which is the red area with the 2 in it. And so, you've got the Basilica of the Agony and that rock, and then you've got the cave, the Grotto of Gethsemane. So regardless of which one is the actual place, if either one of them are, you are in the area of the Garden of Gethsemane, the Olive Garden, and you are in the place, right there, closer than you've ever been before, of where Jesus allowed himself through betrayal to be arrested, and begins the process that leads him to the cross and all the suffering that led to his death and death on a cross. And again, we're looking at that same map, the road in front of the church building. If you're in a car and you're going to the left, you're going north. And so you can see that's the Mount of Olives. Where this picture is being taken is actually across the Kidron Valley. And so you can see it's quite, it's a bit of a steep drop into the valley. And it's not a huge valley. It's not like the Grand Canyon type valley, but it's a very pronounced valley, very steep. You see the Church of the Nations, or the Basilica of the Agony, right there with the 3 arches in front of it. If you go to the left, those trees are the traditional Garden of Gethsemane. And if you go up that road, you can see between the middle white line, or the 3rd white line and the 4th one all the way on the left, you can kind of see a road that goes up the side of the hill there. That's that road you cross from the property of the Church of the Basilica of the Agony, and you just go right across the street, and all of that white stuff there on where it says the Gethsemane Grotto, at the bottom of that line, all of that white building look stuff is the tomb of the Virgin Mary. It's right as you get to that you turn back to the right and go into that alley that leads to the grotto or the cave. Wayne was able to make it. Really appreciate him hustling to get here. They had a track meet at school, and so he got here a little late. Brent, if you could get the lights, I'm going to turn it over to Wayne. Wayne, any closing observation or comments that you want to make about the Mount of Olives? And let me give you the mic here.
The Mount of Olives was cool, but that going into Gethsemane was, at that time, was really probably one of the best places we'd been up to then, I guess. I mean, that's, you ask if it's a one, I don't know if it is or isn't, but as you look from that church over to the grotto, I mean, you're talking like a couple of minutes. So whether it was in the church or whether it was in the garden or in the grotto, you're pretty dadgum close to where Jesus was. And it's, we were fortunate that our tour guide, I'm not sure how this one's going to work, but we had, I think, 30 minutes, Mark. We were there 30 minutes, just alone time in that garden. And that was pretty heart-wrenching in there. Coming down, when you walk down that, I'm sorry?
No.
Oh, when you walk down that street that he showed you earlier, I mean, that kind of sets up everything. That was where he came in, riding the donkey, and everybody was all in right then. They were putting the palms down, and I don't know, it was just very emotional to come down in there. We walked by the street going into the grotto, and of course, y'all are so lucky, those of you that are going, because Mark's going and he's been there and he's done this. It was like, having our own tour guide with another tour guide. So it was really cool to do that, and he's good to go with, and he tells you, things that sometimes you don't hear from the deal. But that, just looking at that particular area, when you stop on the Mount of Olives and look down into the Temple Mount and see all this, it's a pretty emotional time right there. Mark didn't so much, but Jordan and I both pretty much choked up the whole time down in there. It was pretty good deal.
I was crying on the inside.
Yeah. Oh.
What Wayne said is so true. I mean, I don't think it matters how many times you go. You just keep going. My life is different because of something that happened in, at least 50 yards from here. And my life is completely, and the world is different because of what happened here. And you sit there in that garden and you go, actually, so much more primitive than it is. But these trees probably look very similar, and it's in this grove of trees that Jesus allowed himself to be betrayed. He's going to cross, he's going to be taken across the Kidron Valley, across this valley. He's going to be taken across the Tyropian Valley and across the Ophel as he's taken up into the upper city where the house of the high priest is located. And you just keep going, this really happened, this really happened, this really happened. And it sort of takes away, the mystery of it in a sense, because there's something about, it's like going to the OK Corral. I mean, you see all the movies and then you see the OK Corral and you go, man, this happened right here. It's so much smaller, it's so much more intimate, and you realize, man, that was a hard gunfight. The same thing happens here. You're there. You see the trees. There are no, there's no doubt that you are in the area where all of this took place, and you just realize, there was a man who allowed all of this to happen to him in order for me to enter the kingdom of God, and it's a very emotional moment, and it's not the only one by any stretch of the imagination, but we'll let you out early. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
The good thing I thought about it, or about the whole trip, was that, it brought the Bible alive. I mean, you're in places that you've just read about, and then now you're in there, and it makes sense, and I don't know, it just made it really, really real for me. You know, you're sitting there in the Garden of Gethsemane, and you start from where they were, kind of had the Last Supper, and you walk the steps down into the Kidron Valley, and you go right over there. I mean, it just really made it really real.
Yeah, you'll never read the Bible the same, having seen some of these places. And again, 1s and 2s and 3s, X marks the spot. You're closer than you've ever been before, or this is just a tourist trap. You got to decide those on your own. But we're not talking about 1,000 square miles of guessing. I mean, you are in the vicinity. We'll see you on Sunday. Take care.